welcome to this week's episode of Love Decoded, brought to you by the experts at eharmony. Now this week we are going to be looking at two topics. Later in the show we're going to be finding out why watching horror movies can be great for your relationship, all of that cuddling up together. You know you want to find out more. But right now let us talk about the way we speak and whether or not it makes us attractive. Now here with me in the studio is in-house relationship expert Rachael Lloyd.
Hello.
Hello.
I came dressed, this is sort of Halloweenish. Is that a pumpkin colour?
I think it's slightly Christmassy actually. I think you're ahead of your time, as always.
As long as we're happy.
I'm very chilled, very happy indeed. You can join in, you can comment on our clothing, and you can comment on what we're saying by posting your comments below and also hitting the share button. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to follow at eharmony UK on both Facebook and Twitter for all of the latest dating advice, expert views and real life stories from Love Decoded. So Rachael, great to have you here. Talking about this extraordinary story that was in the papers in the last week about a journalist who wrote that she had battled discrimination at work and in her personal life because of the way that she sounded, because of the way that she spoke. She has a very strong Liverpudlian accent, apparently, and she found this very upsetting. What do you make of this story?
Well, yes, I mean, she wrote quite a sort of long feature that then got sort of, you know, circulated in other newspapers and such and became a bit of a topic point last week. And basically it's this idea that if you have a strong regional accent, be it Brummie, Liverpudlian in this case, or other, it can set you back in terms of how well you do in your career, because people make judgments about that. If you're in a sort of sophisticated London bubble, perhaps, you know, and that it can also impact on your dating life. So I guess that was interesting to me at eharmony because we've done a lot of research about accents and the impact that they have on people's perceived attractiveness.
Oh, okay. So what does this specific research show?
Well, you know, it was really surprising. So a couple of years ago, we did this massive survey and it involved getting people to listen to recordings of different types of accents. I mean, I've got a really long list of the different, we looked at, you know, which accent was the most intelligent, which was the most friendly. And
so what were they? What were the answers?
Okay, so the most attractive accent overall was not, as we anticipated, something like French or Spanish or Italian, you know, something like the Latin ones.
Absolutely. You'd imagine that if somebody, as soon as they opened their mouth, then the whole world would kind of pivot to their attention.
Exactly.
Not the case.
It was rather boringly, in a way, received pronunciation.
Oh, really? So super clear, just very
English
easy to understand.
Accent. Yeah. Like traditional British accent, shall we say, kind of newsreader accent. Some people have accused me of having this accent, but you know, it's just that kind of, I guess what we call Middle England sound. Quite
neutral then.
Yeah.
So not offensive either way, it's kind of just very middle of the road.
And it's interesting that that came top because it's not particularly exotic or different. But looking at what else we've got on this list, we've got number 2 was Edinburgh. So that kind of lovely Scottish sounding accent
but
is
still
really
quite light.
Yeah, still quite
a
light.
lighter sound.
Yeah. And actually, I'm just going to get my white paper here. And then Australian, then Irish, love an Irish accent. Oh, I love a Dublin accent, don't know about you.
Do you?
Yeah.
So have you actually dated people on the strength of their voices? Because the very first person I ever fell in love with was somebody at my school who had taken part in a sort of radio play. I didn't know what he looked like, but I heard his voice and I fell in love with him. And I was in love with him for about 2 years. I couldn't think of anything more perfect than the way that he actually spoke. Of course, when we met, there was absolutely zero chemistry, and I spent 2 years chasing after this person for absolutely no result whatsoever. Well, but I can still remember that sense that there was something about the quality, the depth of the voice, the way that he laughed. I was completely transformed. Is that possible, do you think?
I think you can fall in love with a voice. In fact, there's a brilliant film starring Scarlett Johansson. It was called She. It's all coming back to me now. And that was based on this whole theory that you could fall in love with a voice. So she was actually artificial intelligence system with Scarlett Johansson's voice playing the role of this system.
So quite seductive.
Yeah, really seductive and cute and warm. And so the whole point of this story is that the protagonist falls in love with this sound, with her voice. Now, that's probably taking things to a bit of an extreme.
But if you think about it, when you are in the womb and you have that, the only way in which you're actually really connected with someone is the sort of ripples of sound that you can pick up.
Yeah.
And they advise you to play music to your, to your fetus. They advise you to sort of stroke the tummy, but also at the same time to speak to it. So we're very primed from a very early age to be very receptive to vocal sound.
Right, that makes sense actually, and music and song obviously are huge too. I mean, when I was a teenager, I'm giving away my age a bit here, but I used to listen to George Michael, the Faith album, over and over, and it was just that voice that I fell in love with, and then I built this entire fantasy in my mind.
And then if you heard those songs randomly again, would you actually be transported back to that time when you were listening to it?
So what is that? Because there's obviously something in the brain that when we hear a sound, it's a bit like a smell sometimes, will take you back to another part of your history. So do you know much about the science there?
Well, what it is, the science is that basically when something arouses us, and we'll get onto this when we're talking about Halloween movies
Arousing,
as well.
we like.
We are talking about moments of arousal, negative and positive. So if something it almost shocks our system.
I see.
It makes an imprint in your brain. Yeah. This is very crude terminology, but it kind of makes it possible for you to store that memory. So every time you go back to that particular sound of the song or something awful, it could be something awful that happens, suddenly you're transported back to that time again. But I was just thinking, if you're dating, on eharmony's website, for example, do you have the opportunity to say what your musical preferences are?
Yes.
And do you have the opportunity to say what your accent is? Because as soon as you meet someone, they might look fantastic on paper, but if they then open their mouth and you're just thinking, I don't think I could spend another half an hour with someone who sounds like you. Are we being overly judgmental?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one, because I think we're about to come out with our new Future of Dating report, which eHarmony does every year with Imperial College London, and we look at what's going to happen on our platform and others in the future. And of course, this whole idea about getting a much more 360 sense of someone, including their voice. I mean, there's even talk of things like hologram dating, where before you even go on the first date, you have a hologram date, which is like a sort of 3D experience, with the other person. And it sort of saves you time and money, because you can then decide whether to progress.
Do you think there should be audio clips instead, as well as having a photo, maybe a little video clip?
The trouble is with this, we have looked into this, and we did consider at one point prioritising video, because, that is quite an easy thing to do. But strangely enough, video doesn't resonate that well. Our research suggests that people just want to look at pictures and read words at the moment. So there's some kind of paradox here. And I think maybe what it is that when people do record video of themselves for, say, online dating sites, they're perhaps not the best editors. They don't necessarily do the best job. And it might be something that, dating systems need to bring into what they offer the customer, that we can offer that as an asset for you.
Now, don't forget, if you've got a question about dating, about whether accents are very important in dating, would it be a deal breaker for you? Has it been a deal breaker for you in the past? Have you ever walked into a date where everything on paper looked like it was going to be amazing, and suddenly that person opened their mouth and you just felt, I don't think I can really do this? Or did the opposite happen? Did you actually think, well, I'm just going to go on this date, don't really think anything is going to happen, and as soon as they started talking, there was something about the quality of their voice or the things they said that actually really turned it round for you? Do put your comments and your questions below this. Rachel, have you ever rejected anybody because of what they sounded like?
I mean, not that I consciously remember. I actually had a boyfriend for a couple of years who was a Cockney. So he was, it's sort of like, all right, darling. And it sounded like an extra from EastEnders, but I mean, I absolutely adored this guy. And he was, to me, he was like sexual napalm, I mean, he was one of the most sexually attractive people to me. And that potency, so even now when I hear like a Cockney accent, I can get quite stimulated by it. And it's like, in a sense, I wish it had been an Etonian accent. Because then maybe, you know, I wouldn't be double taking every time an electrician comes around. But you've got to see the funny side of this stuff.
That is hilarious.
Yeah.
Your history is brilliant. Thank you for that, Rachel. Thank you for sharing that. We now have our first audience question, and it is from Sean. And she says, I find the science behind accents really interesting. The fact that we can instantly work out class and education. But is this blatant discrimination? Brilliant question, actually, from Sean.
Yeah.
I think it's right. I think we are instinctively judging people without realising that we're doing it.
I mean, you know, we laugh about it, but the reality is what happens when any of us meet someone is that by listening to the accent and their voice, we can work out sort of what income sort of bracket they might be in, what education they've had, where they live, all sorts of assumptions. And it's like our research also shows that there can be positive discrimination. So, for instance, you know, people with northern accents feel that they're meant to be funny, you know, that kind of thing. So it's...
So people might have
like a code, isn't it?
It is, exactly. Well, the show is called Love Decoded, and we're trying to unpick this, but actually some of this is really quite hardwired. That it seems to me that there are certain accents that are less attractive until something changes. And I'm thinking, for example, about the Geordie accent. Yeah. Now, I personally absolutely love it, and I've always put that down to the fact that I went to university near Newcastle, and therefore for me,
you even say
it's
Newcastle.
Very well,
I've been find it's Newcastle in RP.
Only in Sussex, which is where I grew up. But then very few people actually talked about Newcastle in Sussex.
Okay.
The first time I heard the word actually used was in Newcastle, and that's what they say.
They're great.
So for me, it's like, oh, that's a lovely accent. I really love it. It reminds me of my university days. And then, of course, Big Brother hits the screens in the year 2000, and the person who did all of the, you know, and today in the house we have, was this fantastic Geordie accent, and suddenly it becomes very popular, very likeable, and I just think you sort of change it, and you know, Ian Sterling, who does the sort of intros for Love Island, he again has sort of, he has changed the face or the sound of maybe our response to a particular Scottish accent.
But that was a conscious decision, wasn't it, by television networks to move away from, you know, everybody that was a presenter having to speak like this.
Yes.
And to try and make, because, you know, they didn't represent modern Britain. So I think that was a really inclusive move, and I think it's great. I love listening to all the different accents. And in fact, I lived in Australia for 6 years, and everyone sounded pretty much the same everywhere you went, you know, which is a nice accent. It's obviously quite popular. Yeah. But there wasn't that rich fabric of being able to sort of say, oh, I'm in a different county now. Or...
Yes. What I would love to hear from you out there is if you've got a particular accent and it has been a real asset for you. Are you French? Are you Italian? Are you Australian? Yeah. Do you find that people gravitate towards you simply because of the way that you sound? And has that been a help for you in dating? We've got another question here. Paula has written in, thank you, Paula, to say, this is brilliant. I have always fancied David Beckham, but only when he is silent. Does the panel agree that some accents just sound stupid?
Ooh, bit harsh.
Yeah.
Bit harsh.
Very judgmental. I don't know whether I would say that David Beckham actually sounds very stupid. In fact, there are other qualities about David Beckham that I find really appealing. I don't know if I've told this story before, but apparently when he goes into a room at a party or an event, he always goes up to people and introduces himself as David Beckham. And I just think that is so cool. It's like he's kind of giving the impression that nobody knows who he is.
That's
just
quite polite, isn't it?
So polite, and it puts the other person at their ease. It's not like a sort of smug, everybody should know who I am. Are there accents that make people sound stupid? Surely it's the things they say that make
I've actually experienced probably the opposite discrimination, if that's what we want to call it, where I went to a state school for a lot of my childhood. My parents divorced and, you know, we moved. And so I went to a very rural school in Somerset where they all you don't talk like us. You're not normal. So I'm not doing it very well now. I used to be able to do it just like that. But so
did you lapse into that to try and fit in?
Oh, yeah, I could lapse into it. I mean, you know, I could switch. And even when I go back now, I can switch, but not quite that dramatically. But I found that people assumed I was stuck up and really serious because of the way I spoke. So these are all just assumptions, aren't they?
So you're just constantly making judgments about other people, and as you say, assumptions. The best thing to do is never to make assumptions.
I would not. I mean, if he was single and David Beckham wanted to take me out for coffee, I might just go.
We've heard it here first. Dave, if you're watching, Victoria, if you're watching, and you're happy to have him off your hands for half an hour, Rachel is willing. Do you have a question? We will be taking more of your questions, your comments, after this look at one of eHarmony's fantastic love success stories.
I think most people just look at photographs straight away, and I wanted more than that. I wanted someone that I could spend time with and share things with. Hi, I'm Mandy.
I'm Janine.
We've been together just over 4 years after meeting on eHarmony.
I was single for about 5 years before I met Andy. Previous to that, I had been on other sites and it was quite shallow the way they worked. eHarmony was very different. They took more time to sort of get to know what your personality or interests are and only matched you with people that would be compatible with you.
What I liked about eHarmony was it takes you quite a while to sit and go through the process of what you like, what you don't like. When we did actually meet, we found we were really compatible. We just clicked, massively clicked. And it's as though we'd known each other for quite a while, wasn't it? Really, it wasn't.
Definitely, yeah.
It didn't feel like a first date.
No,
even though I was nervous as hell.
He was quite nervous actually, it was quite funny.
We both love travelling, don't we?
Love to travel.
We love cooking.
We love cooking together.
We both wanted children, we didn't have any children. We have a little girl now, which is great.
Massive thank you for letting me find my soulmate, aren't you? Really? So, yeah, I don't think I would have found him any other way.
Wouldn't have met without the website, and we thank eHarmony for that, definitely.
Definitely.
Oh, I love those success stories. They are so inspirational. Welcome back. You are watching Love Decoded. I am Lucy Beresford and I'm joined by eHarmony's relationship expert, Rachael Lloyd. Hello, Rachel.
Yeah.
So, as it's Halloween tomorrow, eHarmony has commissioned some brand new research to illustrate the link between sexual attraction and horror movies.
I love this story.
This is such a brilliant topic because it's very truthful.
Yeah.
This is actually happening. There is proper science behind it. Talk us through the story.
Well, basically, we looked at horror films because it's Halloween, and the link, which you can tell us more about, between fear and sexual attraction. But overall, what we found was that women quite like the idea of being scared by a horror film and then having a date or a partner who's protective of them. And also, of course, horror films and being scared stimulate hormones that promote kind of cuddling and tactile behaviour.
Well, they give you permission to kind of reach for someone, particularly on very, very early dates when otherwise you might just be sitting there and calculating, shall I put my arm around her now? Can I put my hand on his knee? That kind of thing. Another
point to make as well about this research is that horror films, in a way, were a kind of Victorian porn, because they allowed very highly seductive, sensual scenes of disrobing and writhing to take place in a kind of genre that camouflaged the fact that it was overtly sexual.
Well, that's right. It's highly eroticized and very sexualized. So if you've got vampire stories, what you're talking about is, the losing of the virginity. It's about penetration. It's about deflowering. It's basically all there in the storytelling. Yeah. But you're right. That element of fear is something that we actually get a lot of in childhood. If you're a little child and somebody picks you up and sort of swings you around and does it in sort of, clearly a very light-hearted, playful way, you have a cocktail of emotions coming up for you, which is, this is quite scary, but I'm also in the arms of someone who loves me, and yet I'm also being slightly aroused because I might fall out of their arms, or I might be being taken up in the air. But at the same time, I also feel very safe. So all of that is happening all in that one moment. And we become very used to wanting to recreate that. We want the thrill, if you like, of something that's very dangerous, but also very safe.
That's why fun fairs are so popular.
Exactly. Right. Particularly the very sort of scary...
adrenaline rides.
The adrenaline rush that you get from certain rides that feel incredibly out of control.
I love that.
So not necessarily so much the dodgems, because you can kind kind of see
but the
everything that's
waltzers
happening.
or the
exactly, or just you know things that have got big rides. You know, that's why those kinds of things are also great classic dating experiences, because they forge high emotion between the two of you. So what you've got with classic horror movies is this idea that, oh, we're both scared together, but we've both got each other. We're both finding love and support by being with each other. So does it say what the top 10 horror movies are?
The top 10 horror movies. So funnily enough, the one that won, or the tie-break, the two most popular, were Jaws, giant rubber fish with teeth, and Halloween, the original Halloween. And in fact, we've got a long list here. Cabin in the Woods did very well.
Are you into horror movies?
I love horror films. So we've got Jaws, Halloween, American Werewolf in London, Cabin in the Woods, The Shining. Do you remember The Shining with Jack Nicholson and those scary twins?
But I've only seen, I mean, I had such a sheltered childhood that I just wasn't allowed to see anything. And eventually a girlfriend said, why don't you come and see American Werewolf in London? And I don't think my parents realised that it was a horror movie. I mean, I was genuinely terrified.
It is quite humorous, though, and a lot of horrors do have humorous elements.
Well, again, you need that contrast.
Yeah.
You need the sort of cathartic release of the fear, and then you can laugh about it later.
So my secret fetish is that I absolutely love horror films.
So not quite so secret now, then?
Not so secret now. I don't have any secrets left thanks to this show. But I often, like, a perfect weekend for me was a couple of weekends ago. I think it was quite rainy, and there's a new series on Netflix, Haunting of Hill House. And I literally watched it one end of the season to the other on my own, in my bedroom with the lights off, and I loved it. And
would that have been different if you'd had someone in the bedroom with you? Would that have been a bonding moment? Because let's not go into too much detail, but would you have had that sort of bonding experience of, oh, this is really scary?
Yes, and I've been in relationships obviously where, yes, because I remember watching horrors with boyfriends, and there's something so intense about the experience. And it really bonds you together. And
you're in the dark, and it's, you know... what I would love to know is whether you have ever found that Halloween has been a brilliant icebreaker for you, that actually it was the way in which you could cuddle up to somebody that perhaps you didn't know was going to be receptive to your cuddling, your tactility, or have you actually met at a Halloween party, which of course now means, you know, people are covered in gore, they're covered in fake teeth, they're covered in mummy bandages.
But can we be honest? A lot of people dress up at Halloween to be very sexy.
How can you be sexy in a Halloween outfit?
Dracula's brides, you know.
Okay. What would you wear for a Dracula's bride? I need advice.
Not dissimilar to what you've got on now.
Thank you. So I'm dressed as Dracula's bride. Now I know where I'm going wrong in my work life. Yeah, exactly. No, I need stage props. If you have been in a situation where Halloween has absolutely worked for you, I would love to hear from you, because I'm not convinced. I don't know whether I would. Is it just that people love dressing up and they
love dressing up, don't they?
Is it because we feel less inhibited because we've taken on a persona at a party and we've got a bit of a mask on?
I suppose it's living out our fantasies, isn't it? And being somebody else. What do you think?
So if you were a Dracula in a party, you could kind of nuzzle lots of the attractive women under the guise of being Dracula.
They might not appreciate that.
It gives you license to be a little bit forward. Yeah. Maybe that's happened to you. So during the course of eHarmony's research, we spoke with members of the public who had these questions. So Yasmin said, I once went on a date with a guy and we watched Cabin in the Woods, which is the
it's one on the list, yes.
I think it was an excuse for him to keep grabbing me during the scary bits. Never again, exclamation mark. What is your take?
Well, that's the thing. It's a bit like back row in the cinema in the dark, isn't it? Licence to feel.
If you don't fancy that person...
let's put it this way, I wouldn't make a horror film a first date. So I would want to make sure that there was a chemistry there and that I wanted to bond with that person intensely before going to see a horror film or watching one at home.
See, my worry is that when I was dating in my like when I was at school, there were so few options. There were so few things to do apart from maybe go to the cinema.
Yeah.
So you were rather beholden to what the cinema was showing. And at Halloween, they're always going to be showing scary movies.
What's your advice for this?
I think, unfortunately, it is about saying, you know, in any other circumstances, whether it's a Halloween horror movie or not. If their attention is unwanted, then you definitely have permission to say, please don't do that. I just don't really like it. Raj writes in, says, my girlfriend says the fact that I like gory films like Saw and Halloween means that there's something really wrong with me. Is she right? What do you think? I would think yes, personally. Personally, possibly. Rachel doesn't agree. That's because I don't like horror movies.
No, actually, to be fair, I love horror movies that feature ghosts and hauntings and things like that, because I think also I relate to them on a psychological level. They're about abandonment, they're about childhood angst, they often involve children being frightened and, you know, alone.
So in a way, you like the psychological
I like the
complexity.
psychological. My favourite horror film is The Sixth Sense.
Oh my God, but that, would you call it as a horror film?
I don't know, would you?
Because that's one of my favourite films. That's in my top 10 films.
Amazing film.
Interesting.
But, so can we come back to that? But I would say, in terms of Saw and the ones that are really gory, like the new Halloween film I did go and see last week with my friend, but I wouldn't have chosen to. She wanted to see it and screamed a lot. But to me, those gory ones are a sort of genre within a genre. You know, when it's like an axe murderer, that to me doesn't really appeal.
So should Raj's girlfriend be worried that that is his preference, that those kinds of slightly gory movies,
No, I mean, I suppose he's expressing something in his psyche, but no, I mean, they're very commercially successful films, so a lot of people like them. What do you think?
Personally, I don't think that it means that this person has anything darker to hide. I think all films are a form of escape, and that holds good for horror movies as well. And therefore, what you're releasing often is a great fear, a fear around the thing that you're seeing,
around
like
serial
ghosts, around violence,
yeah.
exactly, or zombies, or whatever it might be. So in fact, it's a very healthy way of getting those feelings out, getting that fear, getting that intrigue out in the confines of a cinema. So actually, I wouldn't be too worried about it. I would try to explain to her that actually it's no different from having a passion for maybe, you know, a war film or a Western
Well,
movie
I did have a
something.
relative that used to be fascinated by sort of, you know, dark war films involving prisoners of war and torture. And that was quite sinister, I thought. But on the other hand, again, it's probably just some kind of expression of the fear that we all have.
But you're right that quite a lot of these movies have got a psychological underpinning, and the reason why they're so successful is that they speak to us on this very, on this level about things like abandonment and obviously.
Well, can I just ask you? I know people have got questions, but what do you make of The Sixth Sense? Because that's one of the best-known films, really, in this genre.
Well, I'm nervous about talking about it in case I give something away, because it's such a very specific plot. I just thought...
But it's about making friends with your fears?
Making friends with your shadow side.
Okay.
But it's also... I mean, I had never thought about it as a horror movie. There I am saying I don't like horror movies.
It frightened the hell out of me.
Again, you see, I found it really psychologically enticing.
Yeah.
So I was just very gripped by the story of it.
Well, we would be compatible dates for a film.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So we don't need any of you, we just need to go on a date together. Next question from Zoe. She asks, how can anyone, oh my goodness, I was going to ask you this. How can anyone be scared of Jaws? He is just a giant rubber fish with teeth.
Yes. He's quite a scary fish though, isn't he?
And that's all in the music.
Again, I don't know. I think I might agree with this, because Jaws came out, you know, as a favourite sort of horror film, but I wouldn't put it in horror either. I'd say it's more psychological. And
actually, if you read the novel has got great characterisation in it, and it's all about the tension between the people who want to close the beach and the people who want to kind of have freedom of expression.
Some of that did come out. It was Spielberg films, weren't they? They were very well done. Is Jaws about the fear of what lies beneath?
Again, it's our shadow side, things that we don't want to talk about,
but
don't want to expose.
It came out years ago, didn't it? And I remember my uncle saying to me that he went to see it with a friend, and this was, you know, the first Jaws, so it must have been in the 70s, and the first Jaws, so you could smoke in the cinema back then, and his friend was so terrified and glued to his seat that by the end of the film he had ash where he'd been smoking all down his clothes, because he was just like...
Is there a question on the eHarmony site that asks, what's your favourite film?
Yes, there are. And I guess that the reason that we do that is because it gives a psychological insight into who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing, because
Yeah.
what I'd love to know from people watching at the moment is whether you've ever been in a situation where you've realised that your favourite film isn't compatible with the other person, because you've been with people where they say, well, my favourite film is...
Absolutely. I don't like really hammy comedies. I love a clever comedy, but I don't like it when I'm trying to think of an example, but there is some, it can be hugely disappointing when you suddenly realise that your film tastes are completely averse. You're just like, it's so kind of, oh, maybe they don't understand me.
Maybe they don't get me.
Yeah.
What is your favourite horror film, given that you are such a horror film
Well,
buff?
I would say The Sixth Sense.
Oh, okay.
But then I also think one of the most terrifying films, which is in the list actually at number 7, is The Ring with Naomi Watts. And that's based on Japanese noir horror films, which are some of the scariest.
Which is...
She basically crawls out, this demon crawls out the television and consumes you.
Well, that was our last question, me asking Rachel about her movies. Join us at 12:30 next Tuesday for more dating and relationship advice.
And also, I've written a blog on this, dating advice site.
Dating advice site. So don't forget to let us know what you thought of the show, of Rachel's blog, in the comments before, and always share this episode. It'd be fantastic to hear from you. Follow at eharmony UK on Facebook and Twitter for all the latest dating advice, expert views, real life stories from Love Decoded. Great to have you. That is us for this week. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.